that the ruling NPC would not take kindly any erosion of his power, no matter how legitimate the erosion might be. Also, by March 1961, the Balewa government had passed into a law, a banking act, which was meant to strike at the basis of existence of the National Bank of Nigeria and similar banking institutions. If the law were to take effect, it would immediately destroy the National Bank of Nigeria, as well as the finances of the Western Nigerian government, which at that time was controlled by the Action Group, the party that was in opposition in the federal parliament. But the aggrieved parties, the owners of the National Bank of Nigeria, went to court. Fortunately for them, the federal court presided over by Justice Dadi Onyama ruled against the federal government and declared the law null and void. The National Bank was saved, and with it, all indigenous banking institutions in Nigeria. But the judiciary that gave the ruling against the Balewa government started to be intimidated or undermined, so that within the following 3 years, it had ceased to be a force that could stand for the rights of the people in the face of an obvious government high-handedness and tyranny. Opposition. Obafemi Awolowo, right? The ultimate question, I'm going to need a little break. I need a tea break. I forgot my tea cup out there. So I'm going to go for a tea break, okay? So we're going to continue in a moment, all right? Don't go anywhere. At least don't go anywhere yet. Let me give you something that can keep you like giggly a bit, right? I will be back in a minute. Thank you. So again, I probably should take a quick look at the audio again. So how are we doing on the audio? Great, yeah? I think I want to believe. Thank you very much again for being part of this. If you are stumbling on this and it's quite early in the morning for you, or maybe late in the night as well, it doesn't really matter, okay? Share it, all right? This is some very critical part of history that will be on record now. You can sit down in your living room and just listen to it. You know, people reading this themselves sometimes doesn't really have a real impact on you. Than for you to possibly sort of sit with other people, listen to them, reactions and all of that. They have different, you know, they have different sort of feeling. You know, I mean, some of you have read the book as well. You are seated there right now, and some of the stuffs you read then are beginning to come back as well, like kind of refreshed. It's all good if you ask me. Okay, so thank you so much. Let's go to the opposition. Obafemi Awolowo. The ultimate question that decided the political continuity of Nigeria under the NPC leadership was whether the Balewa government would continue to tolerate an opposition in the federal parliament or try to discredit and destroy that opposition in order to hold an undisputed sway over the entire nation. The answer to this question hinged on his attitude towards the Action Group, which constituted the main opposition party in the Federal House of Assembly. or whose leader, Chief Awolowo, was recognized as the leader of opposition in the parliament. According to the law of the land, it was mandatory for government to always allow the opposition to have its say. This is universally accepted as the guiding light in any democracy. On the other hand, the opposition was supposed to give constructive and not destructive criticism of the system. Nigeria has always been proclaimed a democratic country. If the light should be dimmed or extinguished at any time in any democracy, the system could at once be seen to be heading for the rocks, as was the case in Nigeria. Within the first few months of independence, the federal government had shown itself unwilling to have or live with the opposition. Perhaps there was something African in that disposition. The original African democracy did not institutionalize opposition. Whenever an issue arose, there could be specific opposition to that issue. When the issue had been resolved, the specific opposition will fizzle out and life will return to normal. Whenever another issue arose, a new specific opposition, perhaps involving new personalities, would arise, and so on. However, in a modern democracy, particularly the British style, the ruling government is elected for a specified number of years. After the elections, the opposition does not have to fizzle out and disappear. Rather, it is institutionalized, and it sees itself as an alternative government and a possible successor to the ruling government. Since Nigeria essayed to run a democracy on the British model, the ruling government needed not have seen the constitutional opposition as a confrontational group. But because it saw the opposition in that light, it made deliberate and determined effort to stifle and wipe out the opposition. As a result, it became obvious to an independent observer that Nigeria was heading for the rocks. Although the NPC needed an agent in the West and also in the East to strengthen its hold on the nation, much depends on the type of agent that it got and the relative political powers of such agents. In the West, the NPC found such an agent in Chief Akintola, who was both the premier of Western Nigeria and the deputy leader of the action group. Unlike Chief Awolowo, who really favored a radical solution to the problems of Nigeria and supported the creation of more states in the federation, Chief Akintola favored the conservative approach and was more concerned with sharing the spoils of office with the NPC government at the center. In effect, if Akintola had his way, he would have made the action group to ally with the NPC, take whatever share of the federal patronage he was given, and leave the suffering masses of the West, of the North, and the people of the South to their own fate. If Awolowo would not accept that line of action, he believed in fighting for those principles and rights that he held dear. Hence, there was a crisis in the action group. Matters came to a head in May 1962 when the action group executive found Akintola guilty of maladministration and anti-party activities. He was asked to resign both his appointment as the deputy leader of the party and his premiership. He recalcitrated. As a follow-up, a majority of the action group members of the Western House of Assembly petitioned the governor of the region, Oba Adesoji Aderemi, the Ooni of Ife, to remove Chief Akintola from the premiership of the region and replace him with Chief Adegbenro, who was a more stable and loyal member of the party. This, of course, was possible under the parliamentary system of government those days, when parliamentarians held both legislative and executive powers and could, by a simple majority, vote any incumbent out of office. In effect, Chief Awolowo was stage managing the Western Nigerian government from without. This was not in the best interest of that government. There was no doubt that the differences between himself and his deputy, Chief Akintola, were political. If he had suffered the latter to remain in the government until the next regional election, already slated for 1965, the whole crisis would most probably have been avoided. Of course, Chief Awolowo might have feared that the apparent disloyalty of his deputy would cost his party the loss of the pending federal elections of 1964. If so, his hard line of approach certainly did not reverse that loss. Rather, it made matters worse. The governor acted on the petition and removed Chief Akintola from office, appointing Chief Adegbenro in his place. But the former refused to quit the office and took the matter to court. In turn, he claimed to have dismissed the governor from office. However, the newly appointed Premier, Chief Adegbenro, summoned the House of Assembly for a vote of confidence in his new government. As soon as the matter came up for discussion in the House, the few supporters of Akintola started an uproar which disturbed the proceedings. One of them broke the mace, the symbol of authority of the House. Acting on the orders of the Prime Minister, Sir Abubakar, the police immediately entered the House and dispersed the members with tear gas. No votes were taken. Within a moment of dispersing of the House, Sir Abubakar had stepped fully into the crisis. He summoned Parliament, which declared a state of emergency throughout Nigeria and went further to suspend the legitimate government of Western Nigeria, replacing newly appointed Premier with an administrator, Dr. Moses Majekodunmi. Until his appointment, Dr. Majekodunmi was a minister in Sir Abubakar's government. He was also the personal physician and friend of the Prime Minister. Troops of the Nigerian army were mobilized to maintain law and order in the region. The federal government proceeded at once to deal with Chief Awolowo and his closest followers, not only in the Western region, but also in the East and the North. These men were ordered to be restricted to places far away from their political bases. Action Group Party functionaries were scattered, and many were detained. Every effort was made to destroy both the image and the credibility of Awolowo as a leader and of the Action Group as a political party. Within his first few weeks in office, the new administrator had called on the federal government to institute an inquiry into the activities of 6 statutory corporations of Western Nigeria. The inquiry was quickly set up. It was headed by Justice G.B. Coker. While the inquiry was going on, Chief Awolowo and 27 of his leading assistants and party functionaries were placed under arrest and charged with treasonable felony on the grounds that they planned to stage a revolution. By November 1962, the trials had begun before Mr. Justice Sowemimo, and it continued into mid-1963. In the meantime, the report of the Coker Commission, which was released in December 1962, was favorable to Chief Akintola. Therefore, rather than conduct a free and fair election, as was expected by honest and fair-minded Nigerian citizens everywhere, the Balewa government simply reinstalled Chief Akintola as the premier of the Western region, while a leader of the NCNC, Chief Fadahunsi, was appointed the new governor of the Western House of Assembly for 3 months. And when finally he did, he still had a very rough time trying to face up Angono. Right, so let's take that again. So Chief Fadahunsi was appointed as a governor, as the new governor of the Western House of Assembly for 3 months. And when finally he did, he still had a very rough time trying to face up the remaining members of the action group. The NCNC members of the House played the decisive role by throwing in their lot with Akintola's men of the newly formed United People's Party, UPP. Thus, Akintola achieved a small but shifty majority in the House. The action group became the opposition party. Meanwhile, the action filed in court by Chief Akintola before the emergency, challenging the validity of his dismissal from office by the former governor, Oba Aderemi, had gone as far as the British Privy Council for final ruling. Before Nigeria became a republic on October 1st, 1963, appeals could be made to that august body by citizens of Nigeria. In this case, the Privy Council completely vindicated the former governor's action, declaring Chief Adegbenro the lawful premier of Western Nigeria. As soon as this judgment was published in Nigeria, both the Balewa and the Akintola government acted promptly to stop the enforcement of the judgment in the country. In this questionable way, Akintola clung to his premiership of the Western region. By September 1963, judgment was given in the trial of Awolowo and others facing the treasonable felony charge. The prosecution had alleged that plans were made to overthrow the Balewa's government by a popular non-military revolution. It was also alleged that men were sent to Ghana for training and that firearms and ammunition had been illegally imported. In his judgment, the trial judge, Mr. Justice Showemimo, did not declare that the prosecution had proved his case beyond all reasonable doubt. Rather, he declared that he had no choice except to convict 18 of the accused. This included Chief Awolowo and his notable aides like Alhaji Lateef Jakonde, Chief Onitiri, Omishade, Olawoyin, and also Ayo Akinsanya and Okotie Yesin. He sentenced them to various terms of imprisonment ranging from 2 to 10 years. So Midwestern region. Towards the end of 1963, the Midwestern region was created. This was done by exercising it out of the Western region by a direct act of the Balewa government. It was true that that area contained all the minority group of the region, and it was generally accepted by progressive Nigerians that there was need to break down the 3 giant regions into smaller regions to make for more stability in the country. However, to excise a region out of only the Western region, which incidentally was the smallest of the 3 regions, and at a time when the region had only just come under the ambit of the Balewa government savored of political victimization. Why, for instance, were the Middle Belt and the Calabar Ogoja River regions which were also hotly demanded, not excised out of the northern and eastern regions, respectively. Elections were held into the new Midwestern Region House of Assembly in February 1964. The NCNC, which had profited as much as the NPC from the action group crisis, had rose gallantly to the occasion. It fought against the Midwest Democratic Front, a newly formed party, which was backed by the NPC. Thus, the two parties that formed the federal coalition government of Alhaji Tafawa Balewa were fighting each other in the Midwest elections. The NCNC won 53 out of 64 seats, and thus became the ruling party in that new region. The opposition was composed of the MDF, which won 11 seats. By this success, the NCNC had become a formidable party in the country. It was now controlling two regions, the East and the Midwest. It was also sharing power with the Akintola government in the West and was part of the Balewa government at the center. Therefore, it had cause to be confident of winning the next federal elections, slated for that same year. The population recount of 1963 was forecast to give no less than 50% of the population to the South. This made the NCNC more confident than before. On top of all this, the political situation in the North was becoming worse for the Sardauna government. Soon after independence, the Tifi of Benue province, who were the backbone of the UMBC, became more articulate in demanding for their political rights, which were denied them by the Sardauna government. Agitation and rioting became the order of the day. Rather than make concessions to them, the Sardauna simply used force to suppress them the more. Early in 1963, when moves were made to create the Midwest region, the TP accordingly intensified their political war against the northern government. But the same MPC government which gladly excised the Midwest out of the West did not deem it fit to attend to the agitation of the Tifis, the Tif people, for their own region. Instead, having failed to subjugate them by the use of anti-riot police, the Sardauna started sending troops of the Nigerian army to quell the agitation in February 1964. This double standard showed clearly to independent observers, such as the soldiers of the Nigerian army, that the government of Sardauna and Balewa of NPC did not intend to govern Nigeria peacefully and progressively, but sought to cut down their political opponents. The NCNC had expected to profit immensely from the northern situation, where the popularity of both worlds, where the popularity of the Sardauna was waning, and thus have the bet of both worlds by sharing government of the center with the MPC and seeking at the same time to be its greatest opponent and supplanter. But it was soon disillusioned. First, the Balewa government manipulated the census figures and announced a 55% population figure for the North, thus ensuring that the NPC perpetuated its power at the center. The NCNC became furious and dissented. It rejected the figures and suggested the recount. The Balewa government insisted that any objection to the figures should be pursued at the high courts of the Federation. In this way, Balewa silenced much of the opposition, although the controversy continued. Secondly, a majority of the western wing of the NCNC merged themselves with the UPP in the Western House of Assembly to form a new political party called the Nigerian National Democratic Party, NNDP. This party, like the UPP, took a conservative stance on national issues and sought to share the national cake with the NPC. Interesting, yeah? So we are now going on to the 1964 election. Having lost their western wing, the NCNC now sought new political friends in the action group, and the coalition was joined by the UMBC and NEPU to form the United Progressive Grand Alliance, UPGA, in preparation for the 1964 federal election. In response, the NPC with the NNDP and the MDF formed the Nigeria National Alliance, NNA, and thus the stage seemed set for a well-contested elections at the federal level. As the elections approached, the NPC government of the North did not hesitate to frustrate the UPGA candidates in the North, so that many of them could not file in their nomination papers. Hence, before the election, 67 NPC candidates had been declared elected unopposed. That did not go down well with the UPGA leadership, who called for an immediate postponement of the elections. But the Balewa government rejected the idea of postponement. Thereupon, the UPGA led by Dr. Opara, the premier of Eastern Region, called for a mass boycott of the election by his supporters. Again, Balewa government ordered the election to go ahead in spite of the boycott. The election of December 1964 turned out to be a farce. It was completely boycotted in the Eastern Region, where the NCNC government used its power to ensure that no election was held. It was also partly boycotted in the West, North, Midwest, and Lagos, with the effect that the election result lacked credit and were nationally unacceptable. However, while UPGA rejected them, the MPC and his allies of the NNA, which single-handedly carried out the elections, accepted them. There followed a national political stalemate. No doubt, UPGA leaders deserved blame for unilaterally boycotting the election, thus denying their supporters their electoral rights. Even so, NNA leaders could not be exonerated for using government powers to frustrate the chances of their rivals. Since the federal parliament had already been dissolved before the federal elections, the federal prime minister, Alhaji Abubakar, and his ministers had only continued in office pending pending the election results. Since the results were disputed, a new federal government could not immediately be formed. What was to happen? There were two possibilities. On the one hand, the president of the nation, Dr. Azikiwe, could assume the powers of the republic and nominate a caretaker government to run the affairs of the nation until a fresh and undisputed election was held. Such a line of action would mean that he had realized that there was blame on both sides, and he was ready to be a neutral, umpire. On the other hand, he could surrender to the forces of feudalism and retrogression, who often played the game without observing the rules, and who often insisted that might was right. There was no doubt that Dr. Azikiwe personally favored the first line of action. Although all the results of the so-called elections were by January 2nd, 1965, he did not at once call in Sir Abubakar, the leader of the so-called majority, to form a new government. The president did not act one way or the other. 1 second, guys. I want to check out something here. All right. Pardon me for that, okay? I've got a restricted broadcast there, so I want to get it off my screen. It's pretty much like a distraction. So let's just take it off. Anyway, thank you so much right there. I hope you are following, because I know the number of the interested listeners is growing, okay, which is great. Please, as you are joining, continue to share it. Share it, invite your friends, just share it to them and let them possibly watch this, okay? And take a moment as well to also subscribe onto the channel, right? Thank you. Let's continue. As for Azikiwe, he kept on deliberating on the issue and making various consultations for 2 days. There was no doubt that he saw the crisis coming. He knew that the OPGA had decided to boycott the election and that the NNA was determined to carry on with it. He had sufficient time to have made his executive consultations concerning the constitutional step he should take. Unfortunately, Dr. Azikiwe hesitated in the moment of action. He faltered